Happy Tuesday, guys. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today is Bryan and myself, and we are going to be exploring the concept around training hard enough. Are you training hard enough? How to know if you're training hard enough, and what things, subjective kind of perceptions that we follow in our own training and with our own clientele to help facilitate this conversation. Before we get into, or I should say, after we get into that, we are going to answer some of the final Q&A questions we got from last week's Coaches Q&A episode that we didn't have time to answer on that episode. But before we get into both of these, Bryan, what's going on?
Updates, man. Every week, gotta let the people know what's going on.
Yep.
So I'm in the home stretch. We are leaving for our drive to San Diego on Friday, which is 3 days from now. So when this episode drops, we will already be living in San Diego. We'll be there for 5 weeks. Yeah, we're super amped. Like I said on our last episode, we found a nanny. Since then, she has signed our contract, which really means nothing except she intends to show up. So that's cool. We're super excited about that. And let's see, what else has been going on? I had the opportunity to train at N1 this past weekend with Cass, and then iShack. I don't know if you guys, many of you guys follow iShack on Instagram. It's ISHAK. But he's a good dude. He's in his mid-20s, but super knowledgeable, really smart and savvy. A bodybuilder. He competes as well. And he came down to Colorado, I think primarily to come train at N1 and get to kind of chat with Cass a bit and pick his brain. But we did upper body, and we got to use all of the new equipment that just came in at the N1 HQ. So like when you and I did our practical, we were pretty much relegated to the leg machines and then cable movements for upper body. We didn't have any like chest presses or pull down machines or row machines or anything like that. So it was a really cool experience to be able to go in there and use some of these machines. And Prime, of course, the best equipment manufacturer ever, just came out with a vertical like pull down machine that allows you to change the resistance curve. So prior, that resistance curve change had only been available on the row machine. But now they have the vertical pull machine that allows you to do that. You can do it unilateral. So we, of course, made it lengthened, overloaded, and naturally, right?
Of course.
Because you can't train your back lengthened in any other way. So that was like such a cool treat to be able to do that. And it's so weird, like when you feel these movements that are lengthened, overloaded, it's like you grind through the rep and it still feels hard at the short position. But then when you get to the top and you think about initiating another rep, like nothing happens. You just like go to pull and like your arm moves 1 inch and you're like, oh, okay, that's the end of the rep, you know? Whereas like any movement that fails short, you're inevitably going to get like 80% of the range of motion, then 65% of the range of motion, et cetera. So it was just a cool, fun, unique experience. And I think that as I finish up the San Diego trip in the end of March and come back, hopefully should have the opportunity to do some shadowing with Cass and the team and maybe be there for a couple of the practicals down the road as well.
Very, very cool. Such an awesome experience. I'm jealous, to be completely honest. I'm thinking like I want to go back and do another practical just so I can, it's like we talked about drinking from a fire hose, one, so I'll be able to retain more of it, but two, just to get, I just love those experiences. You know, that's just things that I want to personally do. So it's really, really cool. And it's sweet that you guys are taking a little trip, heading back to San Diego, skipping out on the last little bit of winter. Where are you going to be training back in San Diego?
I think I'm going to join the gym because I just found this out. It really bummed me out a couple weeks ago. One of the members of CrossFit PB hit me up and was like, hey, dude, I'm trying to follow your programming, but we don't have any dumbbells over 70 pounds. And I was like, whoa, hold on. When I was there, I bought 80s, 90s, 100s, 105, 110, 115, 120, 125. We had all of them, right? So I guess Jenny went and sold the majority of the heavy dumbbells, and now the heaviest thing there is 70s. So I literally like couldn't even train there if I wanted to. I mean, I'm not going to be using barbells for everything because that's just not how I really like to train anymore, you know? So yeah, joining the gym is definitely the right move. And then that would also allow me to train with iShack, who trains there as well.
Very, very cool. Except for the whole selling the dumbbells part.
Yeah, not cool. Not cool.
Cool. So updates for me, the big one, I am taking on, I have the opportunity to take on 2 new clients. this month. We will start end of February. So listeners out there, if this sounds like you, male, I would say at least intermediate resistance train. And then the entire goal, right? The simplest way for me to explain this is your desire to learn how to live between 11 and 15% body fat. That is where I feel most extremely confident in dialing in that person, taking your physique to the next level, understanding and learning the nuances of nutrition. I'm speaking to you, and I have 2 spots right now. So you can DM me on Instagram or head over to my website, which is strakernutritionco.com. And then everything else is open from there. You'll find that information. I also weighed 195 today.
Yes.
This is my first time being over 195 since probably like April of last year when I was dieting down. I feel good. And this is something that I'll take like a small aside on. I had kind of realized that this is probably a whole larger episode, but there's always those kind of 2 camps, right? There's like I go through a gaining phase and then like, okay, I'm 15% body fat. And I'm speaking like in generalizations here of like people who are like, in the bodybuilding sphere, let's call it that. Because realistically, like we're bodybuilders, we just don't compete. And we do like the exact same thing. We train in that, style. We eat mostly in that. We just don't compete.
Lifestyle bodybuilder.
So, yeah, or like hobbyist is what I'll kind of say. And the reason I realize is like I was lean. Obviously, I've been super lean from like the end of July through like December. And I realized like you just kind of get bored when you don't have any goals. When the goal is to just stay where you are, like it becomes like, it really just muddies the water of like, what am I trying to accomplish here? Like, your training is going to be suboptimal because you're not eating sufficiently to facilitate those adaptations. One, we're advanced anyway, so the facilitation of those adaptations is incredibly slow to begin with, even if we were feeding sufficiently for them. And I realized like I just kind of needed something new to excite myself, around training and stuff. And it kind of hit me. I was like, oh, I'm just going to put on weight again like that. And I'll find where I feel a really good balance. And I know we've talked about like for me when I was in the like 188, 189, like I just don't, it like psychologically just fucks with me. I feel like I know I'm losing muscle mass at that point type of deal. So I'm excited. I've just been loosening up my approach and just giving myself a little bit more flexibility with my ratio of carbohydrate to fat, and knowing that I need to go over them anyway. It's the one downside to my philosophy of how I coach my clients, of my entire goal for how I've structured my like theory and approach for periodization, is when you do want to put on weight, you got to eat a fuckload of food. And it can be a little bit discouraging because we've now, I've 190 pounds eating 3,000 to 3,200 calories, only training 4 days per week and hitting, 6,000, 7,000 steps per day. Now to put on weight again, I'm going to have to really start pushing those calories. So that is the one downside. It is a 1%er problem, but when you are in that 1%, it's your fucking problem.
Well, and like you try to do that with a lot of really high quality food. And I know that, that's obviously like the most prudent approach. And it's the only approach really when you're in a deficit because you don't have as many calories to go. But, like personally, I'm much more on the end of being a little more free when I'm in a surplus and allowing myself to eat some calories that maybe aren't like the most high quality calories, like bagels and cereals and stuff like that. So I guess depending on how high your calories need to go, there like are certain sacrifices that can be made along the way.
Exactly. So one thing I've been finding like middle grounds, like there's a cereal that I've been having. Generally, I'll do it as like my pre-workout. It's Koala Crisp, I think. It's like a rice-based cereal. And you're going to get like significantly less sugar than a lot of the other ones and just things I spent years of my life, sacrificing health for the pursuit of gains. And now I'm like, I can't do that anymore. Like I spent those years doing that. And when you know how to read lab work and see these things, like I've seen my numbers at the end of like gaining periods and stuff. And I'm like, fuck, these are not good. So it's just kind of like that knowledge is a gift and a curse at the same time, a little bit.
Yep.
And then the last thing is that kind of taking us into our, the topic for today is I did 5 sets of quads the other day, and my quads are absolutely destroyed for the second week in a row that I did this on this particular day. And I even swapped it. So the prior week I did my rear foot elevated, front foot wedge split squats first, and then went into the pendulum and cut my reps on the pendulum in half. So I was like, okay, I can't do that again. So I just made sure I warmed up like really well and did my pendulum first and then did the split squats. And I felt like I could have left the gym after the pendulum, to be completely honest. That's how blown up my quads were. I'm like, Aaron, that's 2 fucking sets. Like we're gonna at least do our top and back off on the split squats. And then I have 1 set on the leg press. And it felt good. Like the post you put out the other day around like my legs were like a little bit wobbly, I was like, this is a good, and then the next morning I woke up and my body was like, yo, what the hell did you do? And it really that's when I messaged you about this. Like it's been really, really interesting once you can select the proper exercises, perform them to a high enough degree, how much your volume can decrease and how much stimulus can increase through proper execution.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm super curious about like what things you've done or noticed or changed maybe in the way that you execute movements, because like you were doing pendulums months ago too. So is there like a difference in the way that you're executing this movement, something different that you're thinking about as you maybe like begin your ascent or anything along those lines?
There's a sweet spot of repetition I find with certain exercises, right? And we've talked about this before. If you do a pendulum squat for 5 reps, right? By like rep 2, you're like, oh fuck, this is heavy, and you're using everything you have. When you're in that like 8 to 12 rep range, like it's different. Like it's not a pure performance. It's like there's enough reps to really, I can't find the words I'm looking for. It's just like it's a different form of hard. Mm-hmm. It like requires more of your soul. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. So
and go ahead.
Okay. So the way that I kind of perceive this in regards to what you were saying about the pendulum being different at 5 reps than at 10 or whatever, which we've discussed, is that when it's like a 5 rep set and it's really heavy, is that you get to the bottom, and even if range of motion is the same between, a 10 rep set and a 5 rep set, the way that I would initiate an ascent on a 5 rep set is by trying to explode, or maybe the word is launch myself out of the bottom. And when I launch myself out of the bottom, there's like glutes getting involved. There's like core bracing, and you're pushing with your upper body. And like, it really has this feeling of being this like systemically draining, like full body beat down type thing, similar to like what I would experience with like a barbell back squat almost. I mean, definitely more acute than that, but it feels less pendulum-y and more like just general squatty. Whereas when you're doing like a 10 or 12 rep set and you get to the bottom and then you actually ascend in that, like the best analogy is the gently pushing on the gas pedal instead of gunning the gas pedal, right? When you approach your rep in that manner, that all of that tension can just be pushed into the quad, and it's like this awful lactic acid burn filled metabolite thing that just like irks your entire quad spectrum from knee to hip, and you just don't get that same feeling when you're launching yourself out of the bottom.
Exactly. It's like an explosion versus like an applying pressure until things start like incrementally applying pressure to produce like the movement type of deal.
Yeah, like if you gunned the gas pedal, you would like spin out for a second before you finally got going, versus that like nice gradual ascent where your passenger is like, oh, that was a really nice pickup of speed you got there. Yeah,
and it just allows you to target the musculature that you want better. So I know like by just like it's not incredibly slowly, obviously, but like I'm using like full range of motion, a brief pause at the bottom, and then I apply, pressure. I make sure that I'm not like rolling up onto my toes or, just pushing through my heels. I'm like distributing force equally through my foot, keeping my knee forward, and then applying pressure. And it's just like you're able to produce the stimulus like much more locally to where you want. And then it's more, localized, like you get more metabolic, like localized damage. You're getting more tension through that musculature. And it's just like, it's like more precise. It's like less of a shotgun approach and more of like a, like a standard rifle that isn't a shotgun or something like that.
So when we talk about this in the context of training hard enough, I think it's a little bit ambiguous because you could look at the shotgun approach and at the end of that set, you actually may feel like you trained harder because you got your whole body into it, versus maybe that more acute thing of like, it's hard in a specific area, which is actually super relevant to the post I made yesterday that kind of discussed the same idea of trying to get that more targeted stimulus instead of the systemic stimulus from a movement.
100%. Like that is the best way to describe it. And in this entire thing, it's incredibly subjective. And I think that's what makes the conversation so hard, because when we talk about like, I only, like the amount of sets, right? I couldn't imagine how hard it is for the people doing this, like, research, and because it's incredibly subjective, and how hard something is there. It's like, there's a massive distance that's open for interpretation of something. Right. And it's one of those things. It's like, it's on you as like the trainee to understand what that hard is and how like the proximity of failure to that set and how true that proximity to failure is. Because as things, specifically like leg movements and maybe like, bench pressing movements, there's that, when we've talked about this before, like that fear of failure, and that fear generally sets in before the failure will. So I know like, and what had helped me was when I started recording more of my sets, because I would be like, man, that was a really hard set. And then I watch it and I'm like, no, it wasn't. Like that weight is not really slowing down. And I was just like, okay, 8 reps and stopped. And I'm like, realistically, if I was really gunning for it and I had like a spotter, I probably could have done 12. But those last 4 reps like are highly effective and are highly uncomfortable.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things I pointed out to you yesterday when you posted that video of your stiff-legged deadlifts was that it looks like you've gotten so much more comfortable with the ability to perform a slow concentric and grind without losing form on like big compound movements such as a hip hinge. And so I want to relay like a personal experience of mine too, because it wasn't until maybe the last year or two that I also kind of figured out how to grind through these types of movements. And an example being like in a pull down, I think up until maybe a year and a half ago, I perform pull downs like you would see Mike Israetel perform pull downs when he does them on the gram or on his YouTube videos or whatever, right? Where he's like, he's going. There's no rep slow speed. Like you can tell he's working harder, but it's still the same explosive pull to the chest. And then he's just done. And you're like, okay, well, where, like the rep never slowed. It's the Lyle McDonald argument thing that was going on, around the internet of like, if you're approaching failure, your rep speed should slow. But Israetel's doesn't. So this is always that like weird nuanced area where if you actually are performing movements without momentum to get you through that, like that initial pull of the movement, then you should actually feel rep speed slow down. And the fact that you've figured out how to incorporate slow concentrics on something like a hip hinge is huge, because like, to be able to maintain posture and not just cave over and turn it into like a rounded back, question mark type lift, it's hugely impressive. And I think that speaks to kind of digging deeper into the how hard are you training piece.
Yeah. And to be completely, transparent, I think a big part of that is the proper load selection. Like on that stiff-legged deadlift, I did it. Now, granted, it's still brand new into my training. I mean, this is the first time I've been doing stiff-legged deadlifts in about a year, right? So I'm still in that like neural, adaptation phase, but at 275 on the bar for a set of 10. And that 10th rep was like, it was hard. Like my knees were all wobbly, where you get like what is it? It's like your muscles recruiting like any motor units it has left to come help. So they're not like firing incredibly smoothly, and you get that like almost like jerky style, like,
they
movement.
like stop and start. It's like they kind of pause and then you go again. And like, you just have to keep from losing form during that pause.
Exactly. And I think if I had another 20 pounds on the bar, like I wouldn't have been able to, obviously my rep number would have gone down, but I think it would have been too heavy for me to be able to maintain that form and get that like really quality, like last 1 to 3 reps with that. So your load selection is incredibly important there, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. It's, man, I keep thinking about the pull down example because it's kind of like a lateral raise too, in that if you even use like 0.5% of momentum, it makes like such a big difference in the ability of the bar to keep moving. So being able to like standardize whether you're using any like bit of, even like a small bit of torso fling with a lateral raise, or if you're doing a pull down and you just kind of like just slightly go into thoracic extension and kind of get that thing jerked to begin the rep, it really just gives it speed that progresses it through the whole thing. And it makes that point of failure like super ambiguous. Like I'm sure when Mike Israetel is doing his sets and his rep speed never slows, like he probably does feel in his brain like, hey, I gave 100% effort. And if I were to give 100% effort again, I wouldn't be able to do the rep, right? Like it's a lengthened overload movement, like a pendulum or a stiff-legged deadlift. Like if it doesn't get up, it doesn't get up type thing. But I really think that if form isn't compromised at all, like you at least have to go to the bottom and see if you can get another one. Because if your rep speed doesn't slow, you can't be sure that really is 0 RIR. Like I want to see rep speed slow. I want to see something happening where you're struggling to maintain technique, but the bar keeps moving. And then eventually you get to the top of that rep and grind it out. And that's going to look a little different on a lengthened overload movement than it will on a short overload movement, right? Like a short overload movement are more easier to grind maybe in some ways because the failure point is at the top. But if you use momentum, you can just get to the top. I guess you're thinking of a lateral raise here is in my brain, but you can get to the top without a whole lot of grind along the way. But if you don't use that momentum from the bottom, then as you get 3/4 of the way up, you're going to reach like this sticking point that you have to fight through. On the stiff-legged deadlift, that point is going to be at the bottom. So once you can get that bar moving and get halfway up, like once you get to the knees, you're basically kind of just hips forward, lock it out type thing. So those failures are going to look a little bit different, but either way, you should see some sort of like slowing of the rep speed through the point of maximum resistance.
Yeah. And for you guys who are like listening, who are newer to exploring this, start with your obviously safer movements, like a single arm pull down or like Bryan said, like a lateral raise. Like there's very minimal risk for something bad to happen taking that to failure. Obviously like a pendulum, a hack squat, an RDL or a stiff-legged deadlift, something like that, like anything with your axial loaded and like it's just that exponentially kind of increases, and you want to like is it trepidatiously, is that the word?
Yeah, he has trepidation. Yeah.
Okay, step into exploring that. But like a bicep curl, lat pull down, these sorts of things, because you will find it that last rep, it will slow down considerably. But if you're never exploring that, I mean, that could be that's the difference between doing like 4 sets on a movement and 2 or something like that, which is really what has sparked me. Because historically I've been a high volume person. It always worked for me, but there was the difference for me was one, when I went to the N1 practical and we were really training to failure, because I trained by myself for years now. And when you have someone's like, no, you still have like 4 reps left. And internally you're like, no, I'm done. This is where I stop. And they're like, no, keep going. And they like will spot you and guide you through it. And then you're like, holy shit, you reach like levels that you haven't really pushed yourself to, because they like, one, you're not maybe you don't video yourself, you're training by yourself, or there's a big fear of injury. People think like when you train closer to failure, your injury risk goes up, which there is truth to, of course. But there are simply much safer ways to do it. And then when I had found that like hey, if I'm really, really pushing myself on that first, set, that top set where I want to get 10 reps, and if I'm really giving it my all, I can't do a fourth set at that weight and get 10 reps. Like, it will get cut in half, if not less. And one thing that I've been finding that with this new program that I'm really, really liking is I will do back offs at like a 20% decrease in weight. And I'm still not even able to match my reps that I did on that top set because I like literally gave it everything I have. And I'm like, this is wild, because like that, the stiff-legged deadlift, I literally took 50 pounds off the bar and couldn't even match reps again. And that's
especially
that's saying a lot.
Especially on hip hinge movements.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So I think like for this, I just want to really just put that out there for us, like really explore your effort in each set. Mm-hmm. And something I know historically, when I would either like write a program based on like, I would start from volume and then like back into that, or following something else. I'm like, well, I got to do 4 sets of 10 on the hack squat. I can't blow my load on set 1 because then I'll fall apart on set 4. But there's a different approach and avenue, I guess I should say, is like, if you blow your load on set 1, you don't need a set 4 from like a stimulus perspective. So there are different avenues, and I just want to have the conversation around exploring these personally for you, because you might find your eyes opened a little bit as I have.
Yeah, for sure. I have a question for you, maybe to play devil's advocate a little bit, because you mentioned that, you started videoing yourself relatively recently, like, 6 months ago, whatever it was. You started really seeing that, like, you weren't training as hard as you thought you were, that it was the N1 thing in November that, really had a drastic change for you, right? You had been training for almost 20 years or whatever it is prior to these last 6 months. And, you have been, in your own words, sort of sandbagging effort compared to what you do now, but yet you've gotten great results. So what are your thoughts on whether, like, is it better to do it this way? Like, I personally align, right? I like the top set, back off set approach. I think it works for a number of reasons beyond just physical adaptations, but, mental reasons as well, life reasons. But like, you got great results training with 4 sets of 10 to 12 at 2 to 3 RIR or whatever it was. So what is it about maybe this new style and training slightly harder that you feel is beneficial to your training, and also maybe it's something that's beneficial to you psychologically or to your lifestyle or something along those lines?
Yeah. So I really, really like that. And I thank you for bringing that up, because I definitely didn't want to put off like that this is better and the other way isn't. Like, systems work when you work them for the most part, right? And the research does seem to exhibit that. Like, if you train a little bit further from failure, you're able to do a little bit more volume, and then, vice versa. Historically, I feel like I've always trained hard, except in this whole, like, purely hobbyist bodybuilder style of training is still relatively new for me. And then particularly like the leg movements, they're just harder on your CNS, on everything, right? I mean, there's a lot of people, you go to any gym, there's a lot of guys who have like good shoulder development, good back development, but like the people who have like great legs, they're either one, like genetic freaks, or they're people that train like pretty fucking hard. And it's because it's just harder to do. So for me, I feel like I'm top heavy in terms of muscular development, like overwhelmingly top heavy. So I feel this is a new avenue where I stand to gain a lot more, because I just historically of my training career have sandbagged some of my leg training in terms of just effort or knowledge or in proximity to failure in certain things. Specifically because a lot of my past training was like, deadlifts, back squat. We weren't doing sets of 12 on the back squat, and even when we were, based on how I back squat, it was my glutes and low back that would get a lot of that, like, fatiguing volume, just based on my form and levers. The mental aspect, I really am identifying with firmly now. I really, really like knowing that I gave it like my all. It is, and this could be because I'm in this just large period of personal growth with being an entrepreneur and growing a business. And so much of it is purely just personal growth and breaking through limiting beliefs and that sort of thing. So I feel like this is a physical aspect that I tie into that as well. Like I like knowing that I gave that, set of 10 on the pendulum, like damn near everything I had, besides like a true failure. And that's just me being a little bit smart. You don't want to take everything to true failures. But I do identify more with that. And it's new for me, right? Like I said, I took the high volume approach for so many years. I'm now like, the pendulum swinging to the other side, and I'm exploring something that I kind of stubbornly avoided because I didn't believe in it, because I had always like, no, high volume works. Why would I want to try this other thing? It's already working. But I guess people who I respect and want to learn from, like you being one, I'm like, well, if these people are doing it and I really respect them, like I at least have to formulate my own opinion based on trying, type of thing. So yeah, a little bit long-winded, but I think did I cover those parts?
Yeah, for sure. No, and I love that. I think that was a great answer. I also I find it an interesting question just on like a philosophical level too, because like we know so much about the fact that you could do more sets and be further from failure, and it potentially creates hypertrophy versus, taking fewer sets to failure. And that also tends to create hypertrophy. And so there's like the personality type, like kind of like the Mike Milner stuff with the neurotyping and all that like there's definitely certain personality pieces that are going to speak to it. There's certain lifestyle pieces that are going to speak to it. Like how much time do you have?
Big one.
And yeah, so like, the time thing, I'm not sure is like even that much more efficient to do the top set back off set, only because I feel like I put in so many specific ramp up sets to optimize my performance on that top set that maybe if I was just doing like 4 sets of 10 and they were at 2 to 3 RIR, I probably wouldn't need as many of those ramp up sets. So time wise, I'm not 100% sure. I also think that there's potentially longer rest periods between sets when you go closer to failure than what you would need if you were like 3 reps from failure. You could probably knock out those 4 sets in the same time that it takes you to do like ramp up sets plus 2 sets of top set back off. So I'm a little torn on that one. But I think psychologically for me, it's really hard to do a set to 2 to 3 RIR. Like a lot of times people see a 2 to 3 RIR set and they're like, oh dude, you weren't even close to failure. Like your bar speed didn't really slow down. Like, you had so many more in you, blah, blah. And they just think that because you were 3 RIR and your rep speed didn't slow, that somehow like that effort wasn't there. That effort fucking sucks, man. And like the data-driven guys use the term, the number of unracks. And that is like a real concern in my brain psychologically, is that every fucking time I go to get under a pendulum or a back squat or whatever the hell it is, even a leg extension, there's like a mental toll that goes into the focus, the preparation, the execution, and all of these things. And it is almost as much of a toll psychologically to do a set to 2 to 3 RIR as it is for me to do a set to failure. So to have to get on there and do 4 sets instead of 2 sets becomes so daunting for me that I actually begin not enjoying my workouts anymore. So that's very much like a me problem. But that's one of the primary reasons that I kind of think this slightly lower volume approach vibes a little better with me.
That psychological thing you said, it does really resonate with me as well, especially if we want to consider the effective reps model, right? So when you're doing that like 3 RIR set, let's say failure would be at like 10 for simple number sake, and you're doing like a 3 RIR, we're stopping at 7. You're doing 5 like buy-in reps to get to that like 6 and 7, and then when you have like 4 sets, you're doing those buy-in reps like set after set after set. And if you're only doing like those 2 hard sets, like you buy in and then you just take it to the house type of thing, and then you don't really have to buy in as many times. So that's another like psychological part that does come through. Because when you're going through those, you're like, okay, that was set 3, rep 3, that's rep 4, it's going to start getting hard. And then that like, just like that kind of feeling of impending doom is like just encroaching on you as you're going through that. Mm-hmm. And when you only have to like do it once and then just take it to the house, I kind of do prefer that as well, as opposed to like knowing, that feeling's going to come in on sets 3 and 4 again.
Yeah. It's kind of like what you and I have talked about, where in hypertrophy training, you can almost like get mentally excited in the set. Like, it's not like in strength training where you like have to get mentally excited before your set, because just unracking the bar is like really, really strenuous, right? In hypertrophy, you just kind of unrack it and then you're like, okay, I'm in this. And like each rep you do, you get like further in it and you get more mentally focused. And then to have to like stop that before you actually really, really put the effort in and then do it again and again and again. It just, it's like this crazy game of fucking with my head that really just doesn't work when I'm putting in that type of effort. So this is like talking, as if you're at like a true 2 to 3 RIR. I think that when a lot of people see or hear 2 to 3 RIR, they just think of it as an easy set because it's not failure. And as we know, that is not the case. I also think that another piece of training hard enough is part of where you and I both have ended up in splitting quads and hamstrings. In that if you are training like super duper hard, really putting in that focus, energy, and getting relatively close to failure on these complex movements, that it really is almost impossible to put in any reasonable effective effort on the second part of your lower body. So if you're doing quads first, your hamstring work after would really suffer. Or if you're doing hamstrings first, your quad work after would really suffer. And in the Follow My Program, we just had hams on Monday and quads on Tuesday. And then there was some upper body stuff on the quad day. But I've already had 2 people report back and be like, man, like I haven't had leg sessions this productive in so long because of this split. And like just trying to like, even if you don't think about it, you're almost kind of preserving something in your brain, because that after you stiff legged deadlift, you have to leg curl. And after that, you have to pendulum squat, and then you have to leg extension. And like all of that's going through your head constantly. But if you just know that you go in and you leg curl and RDL, and then your hamstrings are smashed, and then you can, do some abs or calves or upper body or whatever it is, it's a much more effective way to allow you to put effort in. So maybe in some ways people are subconsciously pulling back on effort because of what they know that they have pending.
That was me 100%. Because I'd be like, well, there's no way I can't do this. I can't give it my all and then go give it my all. Like I already used up 80% of my all. There's very little left, type of deal. But like, for instance, like I have, I do triceps after quads, right? So I had that day where I smashed my quads, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I can go do triceps really hard now because like it's not my legs, it was easy type of thing. And then one thing that I've found really interesting and funny, I have to change my order of my days because my quads are getting so sore by the time I do hamstrings that I can't put my quads in the hamstring machines because it fucking hurts so bad. So like doing like a seated leg curl,
pad down on the thighs,
so bad. I tried and I was like, I can't. I had to do like 40, 50 pounds less because the weight, it just hurt so bad. And then like yesterday, I swapped my lying leg curls for the like standing leg curl because I just couldn't put the weight on my quads. It hurt so bad. So it's just like, it's
same movement though.
Yeah. It's the same. It's shortened overload. So I was fortunate that the gym had that piece of equipment that I could, make a pretty seemingly lateral change in it. But it's what you said is such a good way to put it, where it's by splitting those big muscle groups up, you were able to put more into them. And then you can be like, oh, I have biceps now or some lateral raises. Like I can still give those a good go.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, makes a huge difference for me. Like people always look at my split and they're like, well, how did you end up with this like ridiculously weird split? And I'm just like, I want to train legs. They're my priority. And then I fill in the gaps with upper body volume that needs to be done. So that's how we ended up with it.
Yeah, I like it. Like I said, we talked about like 2 weeks ago. I'm a big fan of it so far. It's been very eye-opening for me. And that's what I think is cool after being, and I will be fully transparent. I in my previous years of of training had been very dogmatic with certain approaches. And I like that now that I'm a little bit older and care less around the fragile male ego, I've become much more pragmatic in things, and I'm very open to being wrong, because just through the facilitation of learning, really, it's my goal.
Yeah. No, I mean, being wrong is great, because then you get to learn and do it better.
Exactly. Yeah. Cool. Anything else you wanted to add on the training hard part?
So I feel like we just wrap it up by saying that if you are performing movements and you can keep good form, and you've never really gotten to a point where you feel rep speed slow in the last, 1 to 3 reps, then you probably need to push yourself there. You also probably can focus on the way that you're initiating from the bottom of your reps. So if you think about that like slow press on the gas pedal instead of, that hard press on the accelerator and launching into the movement, then you can keep the stimulus much more acute to the area that you want it to target. And then ultimately the goal of all of this is kind of like what my post said yesterday on Instagram, which was that we want to feel pretty taxed, like we did a really good job of working a specific area of the body, specific muscle tissue, but we don't want to feel completely systemically trashed. And that pendulum example is perfect, where if you launch out of the bottom and use your whole body, you finish that set and you're just like, what in the world? But your quads, they feel it, but they're not just like completely wrecked. It's just your body and your system that's wrecked. And then, alternatively, if you do that slow press and you really get the quads doing the full movement for you, even if it means slightly lighter loads and higher rep ranges, then at that point you finish a set and it's literally like your quads that are immovable, not allowing you to like walk properly. And it's not your system that feels like, you just got hit by a car type thing. So, find those limits for yourself within the constraints of good technique. And I think that you'll find that you get a lot more out of your training.
Yeah. The last thing I will say there, if you've never videoed these sets, video them. You will probably find a dichotomy between your subjective perception of how hard it was and then when you watch the video of yourself. And then secondly, if you have a training partner, or maybe schedule a gym bro date with someone, and then plan to like, hey, we're going to test failure here a little bit. And then what I think you will find interesting is like, let's say using like, I don't know, like just a hack squat, right? Say you were doing 100 pounds for like 7s, and that was your like, that's my 1 RIR. And then you have this like friend spot you, and this 100 pound on this week turns into like a set of 12. You now know that those 7s were really like a 5 RIR. So it can be a little humbling in that, but it lets you know how much room you have for like immediate progression just by knowing where that kind of seemingly limit truly is.
Yep, totally. No, I love that.
Cool. Let's jump into some of the questions we had from following up from last week. I'm going to kick this first one over to you, Bryan, see what you have thoughts around, because I think we'll have some different ones here. So the question is, my bicep pumps are gone. I have done more and less volume, used both dumbbells and cables, and my carbohydrates are up. I did confirm with him. He is eating, I think, like 400 grams of carbs, I think he said.
Okay. This is tough. I mean, I read this question, and my very first thought, and the one that I'm still kind of stuck on, is that you probably need like a serious deload week. Like, I feel like you've been accumulating volume, like, especially if you are at a point where your pumps are gone, the first thing you think is not, I should probably take a week off and not do any bicep volume. Your first gut reaction is probably, oh, I need to increase volume more. So that would be my first thought. Like, every time that I've ever reached a point like this, it's usually because fatigue or volume have caught up with me, and there's anabolic resistance is the word, where basically your body just has kind of adapted to the volume that you're doing. You try more and it just doesn't have a significant effect. So at that point, if I usually just take a week off of doing biceps, which could be in the confines of like a deload week too, then you usually come back and your body should respond to significantly less volume. So an example there would be like back training. Like my back, as we've talked about, can handle so much volume. I remember at points when I would follow the RP style of training a number of years ago, that I would get up to like 20, 25 sets for back for the week and still kind of be like okay, like, I worked it, everything was cool, but like, it doesn't really feel like anything. And then, you do the RP prescribed deload week where you basically do almost nothing, or you kind of go into the gym and wave pink dumbbells around type thing, and come back and 15 sets of back, 7 one session, 8 the next session type thing, blew my back up. So, that's less volume. And it was just a matter of taking a week off from any stimulus at all to kind of let some of that anabolic resistance flush out. So now, given that carbs are up, that would be kind of my first thought on this.
Yeah. So I'm glad to kick that over because I'm going to answer it in a different approach. It could be that you have kind of temporarily reached near the end of your progression for this certain like model or periodization you're in. You could be losing insulin sensitivity, right? This could be like a 12-month gain that this person's on, has just been pushing food, right? Maybe you need to diet for a little bit, pull back carbs, reestablish insulin sensitivity and glucose sensitivity, and then reintroduce things from that. So I would look into some health markers and see what body fat percentage levels are at. Have you crossed over that like 15, 16, 17%? Maybe it's time to back off, mini cut a little bit, start with the deload thing that Bryan said, and then reapproach it from there. But I would look internally at some things around. You can check like morning fasted glucose levels, or you can just go like LabCorp in order, like an HbA1c, fasted insulin, fasted glucose, see where those levels are at as well. That's pretty inexpensive. I think you can get all three for like 30, 40 bucks. And I would use a combination of what I just said and what Bryan said, but generally there's a reason why. And it's generally doing a little bit less is the solution, to be completely honest.
Yep.
Cool. This next one, I will kick over to you because I don't feel adequate in answering it. Comparing Bryan's personal program to the general physique template at Paragon.
Yeah, we had this question literally covered an entire episode, 45 minutes of talking about this exact question if you go back a couple episodes. Yep. But just to give you a couple general basics, it is slightly lower volume than the physique template. It is not in a upper lower split. It's like we kind of said earlier, it's split with quads one day, hams one day, and then there's some upper body work on some of those days. It is generally going to be a little bit closer to failure, kind of like this are you training hard enough thing that Aaron and I have been discussing for the last 30 minutes. We try to incorporate bits and pieces of that mindset into it. So it's less about accumulating volume and more about doing a little bit harder effort volume, less of it. It's going to be primarily and almost entirely actually require a commercial gym. There's going to be needs for functional trainers, which are those dual pulley stations where you have 2 cables. It's going to have the need for machines, chest press machines, back machines, things like that. We're going to have squat machines, pendulums, things like that. And it also isn't on a calendar week. So I try to train 6 out of every 9 days. I like to try to stick to 2 days on, 1 day off, 2 days on, 1 day off rotation. Sometimes that doesn't work. I hate being stuck on the calendar. So my program is you can work out on whatever days work for you. If you're somebody that loves training on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, then you can just do my program on those days. And, the next 2 days get rolled over to the next week. And I train on average, I guess 4.5 sessions a week, right? If it's 6 out of 9, then it's 4.5 out of 7. So yeah, it really is just train on whatever days you feel comfortable. I think that covers the main basics of it, but I encourage you to go check out the podcast. I encourage you to read the blog, Paragon Training Methods /Bryan's program. And you can read all about the programming there. And then if you join, you can see all of it in Wodify. I place it all on Mondays, so you can see the full week of training on one day.
Perfect. That's cool. I like that seeing the full week on one day. I've always been a fan of that.
Yeah, buddy. All right. This one I'll pop over to you. Is the LMNT or an electrolyte sodium drink a good idea for everyone?
Everyone? Specifically, the term everyone is a little bit blanketed, right? And absolute? Probably not. For the person asking this question and 99% of everyone listening to this, I would say it probably is. Yes. You stand very little to it. It's what I like is you get like the flavor of something that's basically just stevia, which is one of the safest and most widely tolerated artificial sweeteners. But you get like a lot of these, like you get a ton of sodium and electrolytes, a lot of these things that many of us are in some capacity not getting enough of anyway. And I think it tastes great too, which is fun. I mean, it's something that we have started consistently buying, like, month after month. And yeah, I think pretty much yes, but not in an absolute standpoint is my take on it.
What's your favorite flavor now?
Citrus, the lime one. Yeah.
Yeah. The one that tastes like lime Gatorade. Yeah. No, I like that one too. And also I have a question. Do you feel like it is as important for somebody that doesn't sweat when they train? Cause like I work out, 6 out of every 9 days. I go for walks, but I almost never sweat.
Yeah. So this is something that's been really interesting. Jenny and I were just talking about this the other day. Like I haven't been getting sweaty really, like here, probably because, in the Scottsdale, Tempe area where we are, probably like 9 months out of the year, it's disgustingly hot. So the gym just like pump AC all the time. The gyms are like kind of cold. And I really haven't.
And it's dry.
Yeah. And I really haven't been sweating much. I still find myself like periods where I'm like a little kind of like dehydrated. And I would say yes. You might it might be like you take one every other day or only on training days. It could be like a great intra workout thing where you add it to your water while you're at the gym. If you're currently like just doing water. But I would say, yeah. Personally, I do think it is a pretty decent option.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, I mean, I take it as well, 2 to 4 packs a day. And so that's good. I like hearing that. All right. What is a good starting recommendation for vitamin D? Is 6K IU a good starting point?
So this is incredibly difficult to answer within the context of how I have it here. First being, vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin. You can take too much of them. So even though it's February right now in the continental United States plus Alaska, an overwhelming majority of the population is clinically deficient, meaning levels are less than 30 on lab work. I see this routinely with my clientele, which is like kind of baffling. So 6K can be a good starting point. However, just go get it. Just go get your levels checked. It is a very inexpensive test. I think it's like $40. Go tell your doctor you want it. If you have, what's it called? Health insurance, right? Tell them like, just push back and say like, yes, I want it. It's winter. Pull some numbers from any statistic. It's something like 70% of the North American population is deficient in the winter months. And then if you do get pushback, just know you can order it on lifeextension.com yourself. It's literally like $40. And then you can start from there. Just know, kind of like I said, it is a fat soluble vitamin, meaning you should take it with a meal containing a fat source. It could be avocado, a fatty, like eggs, fattier cut of meat, nuts, seeds, something like that, because it needs to be transported via a fat source.
Yeah, I know that it's very individual how people respond to it as well. Like 6K, 6,000 IUs could be really productive for one person and it could do nothing for another. And it could be too much. It could be too much for somebody as well. So exactly. you really have to kind of play with it. And unfortunately, you would have to get tested multiple times to really know. For me personally, when I'm in the summer, I don't take it because I get outside and get vitamin D a lot. And in the summer, my numbers are almost always in the high 40s for vitamin D. And in the winter, I take between 6,000 and 12,000 IUs between 4 and 5 times a week, usually, which is a pretty high dose. And my lab work always has me at the same point at high 40s by doing that much. So I guess I need a decently large dose of it. And then I would also say that the quality of the vitamin D you take is really important. I think there have been studies showing that only the liquid form actually absorbs well. And I think taking pills of it doesn't absorb well. I'll have to look into that and confirm that. I could be wrong. But I know that there is something to having like a high quality liquid like D3 vitamin D that I think is more effective than trying to take a pill or something like that.
And it's often offered in addition to, or in combination with vitamin K2. They do have like synergies in, I don't know if necessarily know if it's absorption, but there are different things that can like compete for resources, and through taking those together, they generally get, I believe it's absorbed better, but do not quote me on that one. But that's a simple Google. You can find out the actual terminology behind it specifically. But like Bryan said, yeah, it will vary. So that's why I recommend getting the test.
Yep. How long do you think that someone needs to be taking it consistently before they can go test, like for it to saturate in their body or whatever?
I would say 6 weeks.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's highly individual, and people with, so not to make this like a complete detour, but people with darker skin, more melanin, like myself, we will not synthesize vitamin D as easily in the sun. So like, let's say with what Bryan said, for me to do that, I would need to spend considerably more time in the sun than him. So I'm someone, I take it year round. And my numbers, I've never seen them like over 60. And that's like with taking it and being in the sun. You know, I literally have not spent a winter in over a decade. and my numbers are not like high, as in like high, abnormal high thing. So it's just test and see.
Last question. I'll kick over to you to start, and then I probably have something to say too. But on rest days, weekends, I find that I am not nearly as hungry. Would it be okay to prioritize mostly protein and just let the carbs, fat fall wherever, even if it means a lower calorie intake overall?
So it depends. I'm sorry. It depends on the context, right? So I agree. I find my rest days, my appetite isn't nearly what it is on my training days. And I do follow this approach. I generally will take a higher fat approach on my rest days just because I generally push so many carbohydrate on my non-training days. And from a pure volume standpoint, it's easier to eat fats than it is to eat carbohydrate, unless you're drinking like liquid carbohydrate. So I would say, yes, it is okay. Just know that if you're like currently in like a gaining periodization, and let's say you're only training 4 days per week, and then your rest day macros are considerably smaller than your training days, you may need to then like really push those training day numbers higher. It's all relative to like what your goal is, how far you are in proximity to that goal, your rate of progress against that goal. But yes, if I were to answer this from like a high level standpoint, I agree. It is common what you're experiencing, and yes, it is a viable approach in a lot of contexts.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was going to say. To kind of expand on what you said about what your goal is, like if you're trying to lose weight or gain weight, then I think you need to potentially be more aware of those variables. And like, if you're going to eat less on rest days, then you need to make sure you're, I guess, potentially eating more if you're trying to gain weight. Like that would be a harder one, is like, hey, I now have fewer days that I can actually gain weight because I know I'm going to be eating less on these other days. So then you would need to prioritize more food on the days that you are training. And then, conversely, if you're dieting, then now you really need to dial it in, because you don't want to go so low on the rest day that you're not actually like giving your body what it needs so that it can function and perform on the next workout day. So when you're in a deficit, you're literally in a deficit of energy. And so you need to make sure that you have those timed specifically and also placed in a manner that allows you to have the energy you need for the workouts.
Yeah, that's what you said at the end is very important. Let's say you are a morning training person and you are coming off of like let's say you train Monday morning and you take Saturday, Sunday off, and you have obviously much lower food intake on Saturday, Sunday. You're coming into Monday morning's training session. Like you are potentially setting yourself up for a poor training session because you just do not have adequate fuel to facilitate the demands of the training session. So, context, like with anything, is important, and that was a really good point, Bryan.
Sweet. Yep, that's all the questions we got, man.
Cool. So as always, guys, thank you for tuning in and listening. If there's any ever topics you would like us to cover at length, feel free to send them over to Bryan or myself, and we will talk to you guys next week.